When Prey dropped in 2022, it wasn't just a good Predator movie. It was proof that this franchise had been completely misunderstood for decades. Everybody kept trying to recapture the 1987 energy, that sweaty jungle testosterone machine, and failing at it spectacularly. Trachtenberg came in and did the opposite. He stripped everything down to the bone, threw us into 1719, put a Comanche warrior at the center of it, and suddenly the Predator felt scary again, like genuinely, legitimately threatening in a way it hadn't been since the original. That film deserved way more conversation than it got at the time. Then came Killer of Killers, the animated anthology that a lot of people slept on because it was animated and on Hulu and kind of easy to scroll past. That was a mistake, because what that project actually did was something quietly radical. It proved that you can transplant the Yautja into practically any historical period, Viking Age, feudal Japan, World War II, and the core concept still holds together. The mythology survives the genre shift. That's not a given with most franchises. It's actually pretty rare. What it told us, if you were paying attention, is that Trachtenberg wasn't just making individual movies. He was building a logic, a foundation, a set of rules for what this universe actually is. And then Badlands arrived in November, and it went further than either of those two projects in a direction nobody fully predicted. The film centers on a young Yautja named Dek, played by Demetrius Schuster Kolo Amatangi, who gets cast out from his clan and has to travel to a death planet called Genna to prove himself by hunting a creature so dangerous the Yautja essentially treat it as a legend. Dek ends up paired with a synthetic named Thea, who is a Weyland-Yutani unit, damaged, searching for her missing other half, and about as far from the traditional Predator movie companion as you can get. Mother, the mainframe from the original Nostromo, the mech suit variants from Aliens, all of it is in this movie. Trachtenberg was pretty upfront about how that decision came about. The way producer Ben Rosenblatt explained it, the filmmakers knew they needed someone for Dek to interact with, because a completely silent alien protagonist needs something to play off of. But putting a human in the movie would immediately shift the story's center of gravity away from Dek, because audiences naturally follow the human. And once that was the answer, Weyland-Yutani was the only company in this universe that manufactures synthetics. It was, as Rosenblatt described it, an organic progression from one creative decision to the next. Trachtenberg himself described it as a toe dip rather than a full plunge, noting that he actively didn't want to grab all the action figures and smash them together the way a lesser version of this film might have done. The timeline placement of Badlands within the Alien canon is also worth talking about because it raised some eyebrows. Trachtenberg confirmed that the film is set after Alien Resurrection, which puts it somewhere beyond 2037-90. Now, for anyone who knows the Alien lore, that's immediately complicated by the fact that Weyland-Yutani was supposed to have been dismantled and outlawed by that point in the timeline, bought out and effectively destroyed by a Walmart-scale corporation after humanity expanded. So either Trachtenberg is treating the Weyland-Yutani ships in Badlands as rogue operations that went dark decades before the film takes place, or he's quietly retconning Resurrection's world-building details, which, given that film's reputation, he'd probably get away with. Honestly, the rogue corporation angle is the more interesting reading. A Weyland-Yutani that went underground, that kept operating in the shadows of deep space long after it was supposed to be gone. That fits everything we know about that company's institutional ruthlessness. There is no xenomorph in Badlands. The post-credits scene does not reveal a queen or an egg or a facehugger. What it does is tease new Yautja lore, hinting at where Dek's story might go next. And Trachtenberg explained that choice with a metaphor about cooking, essentially saying that pulling the crossover out of the oven too early leaves everything raw, and that the elements need time to simmer before you go all the way. What makes the current moment genuinely different is that both franchises have been rehabilitated by filmmakers who actually care. Prey and Badlands rebuilt the Predator's identity from the ground up. Alien Romulus in 2024 did something similar for Xenomorphs. Fede Alvarez stripped the story down to a smaller cast, leaned hard into body horror and atmosphere, and delivered something that felt like a direct cousin of Ridley Scott's original, while still being its own thing. The offspring creature from that movie, that massive hybrid abomination from the third act, became one of the most discussed sci-fi monster designs in years, and now Dek actor Schuster Kolo Amatangi has gone on record saying that among all creatures, the offspring would be the genuine test for Dek, basically implying that most monsters would get handled, but that thing is a different category. Disney now owns both franchises under 20th Century Studios, which removes the old rights tangle that made genuine crossover development complicated for years. Marvel proved definitively that Disney is willing to play a long game with shared universe construction when the conditions are right. Alien Earth showrunner Noah Hawley has confirmed that there will be no Predator appearances in his series, and Trachtenberg confirmed that he and Hawley talked primarily to make sure their respective projects weren't overlapping. That could sound like two separate sandboxes that will never connect, but I think it's actually more strategic than that. The better long game is exactly what Trachtenberg described. Let the elements cook independently, develop the characters in their own stories, and then bring them together when the collision has actual weight. Thea survives Badlands. She carries Weyland-Yutani knowledge into whatever comes next. If a sequel to Badlands puts Dec on a trajectory that intersects with xenomorph research, maybe that rogue corporate operation I mentioned earlier, running xenomorph experiments in deep space, you have a crossover that emerges from the story rather than being bolted onto it. The Offspring angle is particularly compelling as a potential sequel target because of what that creature represents thematically. The xenomorph is evolution. The Offspring in Romulus was engineered, forced, Weyland-Yutani trying to control and weaponize evolution for profit. Everything the Yautja despise. The hunt for the Yautja is about proving worth against a worthy opponent. It's ritualistic and almost spiritual in the way Prey made explicit. Weyland-Yutani taking something like a xenomorph and turning it into a lab product is the kind of desecration that a Predator culture built on honoring the hunt would find genuinely offensive. That's not just monster versus monster. That's a philosophical confrontation that actually means something, and putting Dec at the center of that story is the right call precisely because he's young and still defining himself. A sequel where that character has to face something that represents manufactured corporate predation of the natural order, something that corrupts what a hunt is supposed to mean, that's a character arc with real stakes attached. The fact that the post-credits scene in Badlands pointed inward toward Yautja lore rather than outward toward xenomorphs is actually reassuring. It means Trachtenberg isn't trying to rush the convergence. He's planting flags and letting them stand before he starts connecting them. Prey was a standalone. Killer of Killers was a stylistic expansion. Badlands is the cosmic door opening. Whatever walks through that door next needs to be the thing that makes the last decade of franchise reconstruction feel like it was building towards something. Right now the pieces are in place, and somewhere in deep space there are creatures, in crates, in labs, in the dark, that neither franchise has fully reckoned with yet. The hunt genuinely feels like it's just getting started. And maybe that's the most exciting thing about where we are right now. For the first time in a long time, nobody actually knows what comes next. Not in a "this franchise is a mess" kind of way, but in a genuinely unpredictable, anything could happen kind of way. Trachtenberg has shown 3 times now that he understands restraint, that he knows the difference between building something and just detonating it for a reaction. If Badlands underperformed financially, that's a studio problem to solve. But the creative foundation that film laid down doesn't disappear because of a disappointing opening weekend. The mythology is richer than it's ever been, the characters are more layered than they've ever been, and 2 of the most iconic sci-fi horror universes in history are closer to a meaningful earned collision than they have been at any point since that first Dark Horse comic in 1989 put the idea in our heads. Whatever Trachtenberg does next, whether it's another solo Predator story, a direct AVP swing, or something nobody is predicting yet, the franchise is in genuinely capable hands, and for a series that spent the better part of 15 years being treated as a punchline, that alone is worth something.